Crescenta Valley. Technology is changing faster than ever before. The COVID pandemic has really helped usher in a kind of digital society. Mm-hmm. I think it's worth talking about the intersection of children, smartphones, and public school specifically. Test, test, test. So I'm super excited to talk about this today. My name's Johnny Brookbank.
I'm Connor McClenahan.
What do you do?
I'm a psychologist in private practice. Your cell phone just went off, by the way. Do you want to check that?
I should probably.
And I practice in Pasadena and in downtown LA. So I have thoughts about this in terms of child development and our brain development and what that means. But I also have thoughts of it as a parent of 4 kids.
How old are your children?
Our oldest is 12. Our youngest is 4. And all boys and all right here, obviously, in the La Crescenta School District.
GUSD.
GUSD. Yep.
I also have 4 children. I have 13-year-old twins on top, 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, also in GUSD.
There's always been electronics. I mean, when we were growing up, we had Nintendo 64, Atari, whatever it was.
All this stuff.
And what is different about things now than it was before? I, as a parent myself, can feel that there's some kind of shift that's happened where this has become a lot more consuming. Mm-hmm. It's become a lot more of a temptation a whole family. And it's much more enthralling in terms of the way that it pulls their attention. But there's also a lot of good research that has been coming out recently about what is unique, not just about having an electronic device, but having one that's private or personal and having one that is geared around social media.
Social media, sure.
But all of these things make it, I think, difficult as a parent to know what is the actual effect on my family as a kid? What is the cost to these things?
Yeah.
And what is our decision together as a family or as a community about the kinds of things that we want for ourselves and we want for our kids? There's all kinds of arguments that can be made about, well, this is the world we live in now. Don't you want your kid to be fluent?
Don't you want them to get used to impulse control? Don't you want them to learn to responsibly manage the phone?
In that landscape, something that's missing is good dialogue about this issue that helps us to have a more complete picture of what our actual thoughts personally are, each as individuals who are trying to make decisions for our family. Sometimes social media space isn't great at offering that of actual good dialogue.
Because the digital conversation is so big.
It's big.
It touches every single aspect of our human existence.
To distill it down to a single question maybe for this conversation, what are our thoughts as a community about having your kid have a cell phone in school?
Yep, that's it.
And there are lots of feelings about that that are so important to consider. I think that as we talk about this, it's important to recognize that with any hot or controversial topic,
very controversial,
each person, you and I, each person is going to have a multitude of feelings and opinions about. And sometimes on social media, we can almost like pretend that we only feel one thing about it.
Like or dislike.
Are you on this side or on this side? Instead of realizing each person might have a little dialogue even within themselves about some of the pros and cons.
So often as humans, we look for that path of least resistance. Boy, isn't it easy to throw them on an iPad?
Yeah.
Right?
It's easy.
Boy, it's nice too.
They want to do it, and then sometimes as a parent, you go, I don't want to think about
I just don't want to worry about
my
it.
kid
Just
right now.
Please get on this thing. I want to read a book, or I want to go on a walk, or I'm going to go on a date with my wife. And I know that if you're on that, you won't get into any real world trouble because you're not getting off that. You might not even go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
You're not. I don't have to worry about you eating.
Jonathan Haidt came out with this book called The Anxious Generation, which is talking about this huge change that's happened since the advent of social media, where test scores have gone down over the last 12 years.
Since like 2012, 2013, thereabouts?
There's a precipitous decline in test scores, and that's because kids have a really huge issue with focusing
nationally
when they have access to social media. It's very difficult for them to tell themselves to do something hard when there's an easy thing to distract themselves. Depression and suicidality among girls specifically, and the teenagers, is correlated with a huge rise during that same time period. So you have depression going up, you have suicidality going up, and you have testing scores going down, all not at the advent of cell phones, but the advent of social media. And we know exactly why this is, just because of the effect that it has on us as adults too, is the way that it can make us more disconnected from other people, the way it can keep us in this time blindness. And it can be a real challenge, even with us who have totally formed prefrontal lobes, which is where you kind of orient your attention.
I can't go to the bathroom unless I have my phone. I don't want to be trapped in there without a phone. Isn't that crazy?
Because you are staring into what feels like an existential abyss.
I have to grab it
in silence.
I have to grab it at the stoplight.
Yeah.
I have to grab it when I'm in line at the bank or in line anywhere.
Yeah. Now
Commercial times.
Now think you're a 13-year-old, and what does that feel like? So something that can make it difficult to make a decision about this, if you're going to do something that's different than the norm of giving your kid a phone, is that your kid's going to say something like, but everyone else has it. How come I'm the only one who doesn't have it? And that's where I think there is this thing called a collective trap, which is that people don't want the phone just because they want to have access to these things. They don't want to be the one who's left out.
Right.
And this is where it's been so empowering to be able to talk to you guys, to talk to our other friends about what we agree on together about our standard for our families, so that
as a bubble,
so that, that's a COVID word, isn't it?
That's a COVID word, yeah. Are we being triggered?
Yeah, a little triggered. But as a unit together of deciding something of where do we overlap so that we can have more strength together when we make these decisions.
Yes.
So, for example, if I can say, hey, son, you're not going to have a phone when you go to junior high. And he goes, but everyone's going to have a phone. Then I can say, well, that's not true. Johnny's kids, they don't have phones.
And such and such kids aren't going to. And such and such, because I've already spoken with their parents and we've all agreed.
Yeah. So that is, I think, one way that helps us make a decision is not just talking with our own family about this, what works for us, because that can be really hard as a parent to make a decision that's against the grain when it's all up to you. It can feel like so much effort to consciously always be deciding and always be saying no to your kids. But it can be so much easier, I think, when we have good dialogue and we can talk with our other families about what we want for our kids.
And you know what? I would just like to say call to actions are usually saved for the very end, but this is a good one. If you're watching this, maybe think to yourself, I should connect with one of my close friends if this is important to me, and try to build a kind of community bridge there. That's something that I found is super helpful, because my kids do say things like everybody has them or nobody has to do this. And I always go, actually, I know that's not true.
Yeah. Because sometimes I'll be like, hey, kids, no phones, no electronic devices. And they go, but nobody else is free. Everyone else is
on an electronic device.
So if I go outside, nobody else is outside.
I've heard that, right?
So I'm going to be the only one outside playing on the street if that's the case.
And if I go over to my friend's house, he's just on his device.
Yeah.
My kid has these experiences. Probably a lot of people have these experiences. Maybe people have come to my house and had these experiences where my son will go to someone's house and the kid will just sit on a device and play with it. And it's just the two of them.
Yeah.
My kid's like, why am I here? He'll come home and be like, I was offended. But you go, those are some really questionable social skills that are being taught, right? These devices are teaching social skills.
Yeah. So as we're thinking about that, so there are clear costs. We talk about not just the cost, but the hidden cost of what are you not doing if you're on your phone. So when you think about your own kids, what are they not doing when they are on their phone? It's likely they're not learning a skill like guitar or piano or dancing,
drawing, video
they're
cameras,
also not
whatever.
Interacting with friends in social ways that help them build these kind of playful social skills, which is exactly what this time period is for.
They're not going across the street and knocking on a friend's door.
Right. To escape boredom.
Path of least resistance.
Right. Without a cell phone, the only escape from that loneliness is you contact somebody else. So these are what Jonathan Haidt calls experience blockers.
Oh wow, interesting.
They are devices that keep us from actually experiencing other good things, and that can be part of the problem with it. So I wonder what are some of the things that you've heard as you've been seeing comments on social media about some of the resistances or difficulties or even just opinions that some people have about wanting their kid to have a cell phone in junior high, let's say.
Let's start the day chronologically. I've heard people say something to this flavor. I want to be able to track my child. They either walk to school or take the bus. I want to make sure that they get there safely. They'll comment reckless drivers on Foothill.
I think that's a valid concern. And also, there's not very much problem developmentally with the idea of being able to know where your kid is. I don't think that's taking away too much from them to be able to know where they are. They still have independence, even if they have some way of being tracked. I think that is not a detrimental thing. And so I can see why parents would want that for their kids and how a cell phone is an easy way to solve that problem. So I think that's an understandable desire for a parent. My question is, are there other ways of solving that problem that don't require giving your kid access to these negative side effects, the depression, the suicidality?
Too often we're conflating, I want to be able to monitor or contact my child with they should have a smartphone, which is like a whole other conversation.
Teachers will talk about this, how in the hallways in between classes, instead of kids in classes jumping, saying hi to their friends, high-fiving, doing something together, learning something, laughing, telling jokes. They talk about
meeting that girl by the locker,
being curious about something, being anxious and trying to figure something out. How am I going to belong? All these things that are so important.
Who texted me?
Yeah.
Who texted me? And I need to get back to them.
And then so you see these kids coming out of their classrooms and putting their heads in their phones. And you talk about teachers going into the hallways and just hearing kind of silence.
It's eerie.
Of course, if you are a kid, you're not going to want to be the only one who puts the phone down and says hi to your friend, because it's going to feel like you're intruding. It's going to feel risky, and it's so much easier to just pick up the phone. But then you go, what is being socialized? We all had experiences where we had to deal with the discomfort of being with people our age and not knowing how to fit in and having to somehow get over that hump. And getting over that hump takes a lot of effort. But if you can just pick up a phone, you put your head down. And I think that's the cost that that we don't realize that comes with the cell phone at school specifically. It's not just the test scores, the depression, or the rise in suicidality. It's this lack of socialization where you're helping a kid learn how to belong and connect with other kids. I mean, what you'd have to do is have a controlled experiment where you say, for this whole school, we're going to let them have cell phones at school. And for this school of almost, identical population, we're going to not let them have a cell phone at school. And we're going to see how they do on these measures. That would be a great study to do.
That data exists.
And what do we find?
Test scores have gone up. Suicide rates, depression rates have gone down. Wellness rates have gone up. Grades have gone up. They have teachers saying, please don't send me to a phone-friendly school. Right. This is so much better for me
as a
teacher to do my job effectively.
When the kids don't have cell phones.
When the kids don't have cell phones.
So right there, you have two different kinds of data, right? You have quantitative data, being able to measure on a chart how much their scores go up, but then you have qualitative data of interviewing a teacher, for example, or even noticing the change that happens in your kid. As a parent, you can do this study as yourself, where take a Saturday and just say, hey, this Saturday, we're not going to have any screens.
What happens?
And you kind of did this experiment recently with your kids.
I did it. God, they were mad.
They were initially...
And then they got bored.
And
then they got cool.
Okay, so mad, bored, cool. And would you see that same progression through the day if they were on screens? What would the progression be?
There's no progression.
Bored, cool.
It's neutral, slack-jawed, drool.
My own kids, if they're on screens all day, or even if they have access to screens during the day, they're more complaining.
They're moody.
Okay, so you have that. And then you say, okay, I'm going to do a simple experiment here. I'm going to do A, B, A, right? So I'm going to do one day with screens. B, I'm going to do one day with no screens. I'm going to tell them
zero screens,
nothing. And then I'll do another day with screens, and then just see what happens for your family and for your kid. And you can notice what are the actual benefits that are on the other side of this.
This is an exercise or an experiment that every single parent has the ability to do and to see the effects of.
To discern for yourself, what is this thing that's going on?
Can I tell you something wild that a mom recently shared with me, one of the moms that I'm close with? She said, my son had done something recently and got grounded from his screens for a month. She goes, I liked him so much more. I liked him so much more.
Became a different person.
You know what she said? She said he was less derpy. That's the word she used. He was less derpy. It's just an observation.
Yeah. coming back to the worry about letting your kids not have a phone, let's say there was a policy where, Rosemont Middle School said no phones. If they bring a phone on campus, you're going to lock it up and they can unlock it at the end of the day. What are some of the resistances that parents have to that policy?
That's a great question. We should first note that GUSD does have policy surrounding devices. You're not allowed to take them out. You're not allowed to have them in class. Every teacher, much like every parent, approaches it differently.
So it's left up to the teacher to enforce this difficult rule.
And so I've heard teachers say, there are kids who routinely pull this phone out in class. I've gotten to a point where I won't engage with them anymore. You know what? You don't want to be here. You want to check out. I'm done spending time trying to get you off that device.
They're exhausted.
They're exhausted.
If that's the situation where they do have a policy and it's enforced classroom by classroom,
yes,
just put on the teachers to enforce.
Yeah.
What is the solution that might help both kids and parents in a better way?
Well, there is a product currently that is in over 2,000 schools in the United States. 10% of LAUSD is using it. Palmdale and Lancaster are getting ready to implement it. Compton is voting on it. There are these Yonder pouches, and they are pouches about the size of your cell phone. When you show up to school, when you walk through the doors, you turn your cell phone off. You put your phone into one of these pouches. You remain in control of that phone. It snaps onto your bag. It goes into the bag. It's not taken away from you.
It's magnetically locked?
It's magnetic and it's locked. And so every single classroom has a key that you'd use to unlock it.
You just tap the pouch.
Tap it and it kind of unlocks.
Unlocks the magnetic.
These are not safes. In an emergency situation, you can just use scissors to cut it open.
So in an emergency, let's say worst case scenario, active shooter, they could take scissors and cut open the Yonder pouch
and turn it
on and have access to their device
immediately. It's in
because that's one of the concerns, right? Is like, what if there's an emergency? How's my kid going to be able to contact
This is the main concern, right? When you get the kid into school and you start talking to parents about the child not having a cell phone inside of the school, I have found that the first comment that comes up over and over and over again is the active shooter.
Valid concern. I mean, it terrifies me as well. And I can see why it makes you feel afraid of going, what if I can't contact my kid?
Right.
But like you're saying, I mean, I think the thing that parents are afraid of there is that in an emergency, they wouldn't be able to contact their kid, obviously.
Right.
But I don't know that this policy makes that harder, you know what I mean, in terms of contacting your kid.
So that's what I would call like major emergency. Something really bad is happening. Okay. Solution. Still accessible. The next thing is minor emergency. Your dentist appointment has been changed. I'm picking you up behind the school instead. You know what the solution is?
Call the school.
Call the school.
And they will let your child know.
Yep.
Yeah. But again, you're right. This is a cost, right? To having no phone, this is one of the costs. That's the thing that would be more difficult, maybe. It would be so easy to be able to just text your kid.
Shoot your kid a text.
And that is totally legitimate. If that's what you want for your kid, I think it's just more like, if that is the cost, if that's the thing that you end up losing is the convenience of contacting your kid.
Yeah.
What are you also gaining? What is the benefit your kid's going to have? If that's the cost, what's the benefit of having a phone?
Right.
And these are all the things that we're talking about. Your kid's probably also going to have higher test scores.
Yep.
They're going to be more connected to their school and to their teachers. They're going to probably have more friends.
Yep.
If you specifically have a teenage girl, they're going to be less depressed and suicidal. Those are the benefits. And then you have the cost of the convenience of contacting them.
Something that's come up a couple times, which has been really educating for me as a person, is there are students, obviously it's a minority, however, minority voices matter. Not my child, I'm speaking on behalf of them now. My child has type 1 diabetes. And they use their phone to help monitor this. And it's very, very important. We have found a system that really works. If you try to take away this phone, this is going to be a medical problem for my child.
And I think that's part of the fear, right? Is that there's this top-down decision that's made, and now I'm disadvantaged because of it.
Right.
I think it's just so important. I mean, obviously, you know, you don't want to just make a decision for everybody, especially in a medical case where there are specific needs. But I think it's just so important to just know what is the cost and what is the benefit of these things. You know, how might you as a family, if that's the case of giving your kid a cell phone and having him bring it to school, what are some other parameters you could put on there so that the harmful aspects of the device are managed and the helpful aspects are increased?
In speaking with Yonder, the pouch company, they said, great question. The way we manage that is kids who have diabetes, they also get a pouch and it just doesn't have a magnetic lock. They just learn to manage that phone in an appropriate manner. We definitely lean on them more and say, look, you're going to need to demonstrate responsibility. First of all, you have diabetes and you're going to need to demonstrate more responsibility. And I thought that was a really smart solution. The next thing that came up on the coattails of diabetes was IEPs, individual education plans. Again, I want to say this is a learning experience for me. None of my children use those. So I've really been doing some research. I've been reading up on it. I've been watching YouTube videos. I've been trying to better understand what those needs and asks are.
That's difficult, isn't it? And again, as a psychologist, you know, we do assessments for kids, you know, to determine ADHD or autism or other learning disabilities like dyslexia. But you'd want to think about, if it is helping them with their IEP, how do you limit the ways that it is also likely harming them with their lack of attention or the distractibility, which is usually the case in a lot of learning disabilities, is distractibility. Whether it's, you know, something like OCD or autism or dyslexia, there's a difficulty with orienting attention towards something difficult. And if you have a phone, that's going to make it more difficult. And I'm just saying that as a psychologist, and obviously you want to talk to your medical provider. And so if the cell phone is locked, obviously you want to create a custom plan with your medical provider around how they're going to be able to get access to the tools that they need to do well in school.
And that's what it is. It's about the tools, right? And so in my mind, this is a personal opinion, when you're using this device for medical or learning resources, that feels like an entire separate conversation to what we're having. Let's find a solution that works, right? I think that maybe the statement being made on that side is, don't take this away from me. And it's not your right to take it away from me. You're right. We should be able to talk about this and find a solution that works for everybody.
It's wonderful. So I think overall, I appreciate the diversity of views on this.
A lot of diversity of views.
So important to hear some of the resistance and some of the interest in putting boundaries around cell phone. One more thing. Schools are doing this right now.
It's happening.
Schools are doing this. Schools are making decisions about how they're going to manage cell phones in school environments. And so we can look to those as copycats, or even opportunities to see what that has been like for them. What are the good things? What are, maybe for you, of thinking, what are the challenges that they're experiencing? Whatever it is, we can look to those people as flagships that help us inform what are the decisions we want to make as parents.
At this point, we would not be guinea pigs, right?
There
are global examples and national examples and state examples that we can be looking to say, what do we think? Is it better or worse? The data is available. The options are clear. And then to build on top of that, I think something that's really important that maybe a lot of people aren't talking about is that this is actually a global conversation. I think 1 in 4 nations have taken steps towards kind of tightening regulations or becoming phone free. Many states in the United States have started, including red states like Florida and blue states like Vermont. I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not just happening in your neighborhood, or it's not just an issue like my kids love electronics. I don't know. It's bigger than that. It is happening around our entire globe. If we don't have these conversations today, we're having them next year. We're having them the year after that. There's not a world where this thing continues to evolve at this rate and we say to ourselves, we figured this out back in 2019. It's Thanos. It's inevitable.
I would encourage for anyone listening to read more about this. Jonathan Haidt has some great resources, Haidt, Haidt. And he has a book out called The Anxious Generation that talks all about the data and research around the difference that social media has made for our own kids that we didn't experience when we were young. And so to just educate yourself more on what is going on and what is the data saying about some of the changes that have happened for our kids, so that you can make better decisions, not only with your own family, but with your larger group about what feels right to you.
And if reading's not your thing, just get on YouTube and punch in Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
He is on so many podcasts. He is on so many talk shows. There are so many interviews with him. You will have no shortage of information. And listen, technology is good.
Yeah.
This is not a conversation about it being evil and ruining our society, and it all needs to go away.
Have more conversations with people you disagree with, but also with your own family and your friend group.
Yeah, your neighbors.
Your neighbors.
Ask them what they think about phones in schools.
Johnny, thank you.
Goodbye.